going to do these in bits. Cool, so here we are today, going to look at my full quiver for 2024. It's going to be a full breakdown of what I use, why I use it, how. So to start with, I think we'll go through my kind of dimensions as they were. So to start with, my height, I'm around 5'10", and my weight is around 70 kilos. Obviously varies a little bit, but that is kind of my rough weight and height. So weight and height, I think plays quite a big part in choosing what boards and sails you're going to pick. And with windsurfing, it's quite good. There's not really an ideal weight, I would say. Definitely in wave sailing, for instance, there's people like Thomas Traversa on the World Tour and Philip Costa who are, you know, very, very far apart, one being more than 60 kilos and one being sort of high 90s, which obviously they're still both amazing riders, so it really does depend about what kit you take. I think maybe there's, you know, some advantages. If you're lighter, maybe you can move around the brake a little bit more. The bigger guys can maybe put a little bit more power through those turns. For me personally, I think if you're a really good wave sailor and you want to make the most out of most conditions, you kind of want a minimum of 2 boards, I would say, to cover those wave conditions. So to start with, you'd have your high wind board, your smaller board, and then you'd have your second board as your kind of low wind board for when the conditions aren't as good. For your high wind board, I'd say you want something that's a similar volume to your sort of body weight. So for example, for me, I'm around 70 kilo mark. So my small board, which is my Grip 4, is a 69 litre. So it covers me when it gets really windy and also in those sort of 4-0 conditions as well. And then for your bigger board, I would recommend you get something that's around, the volume is around 10 litres more than your body weight. So for me, it would be around the 80 sort of litre mark, which is why I've got my big board as a 79 litre Grip 3. Having said that, if you're kind of limited on budget or other things and you just want one board, then it kind of depends on what you really want to sail in the most. If you're like a competent wave sailor and you kind of only really want to go out when it's quite good, then you'd probably get a board that's sort of more similar to your body weight, just because you're going to have more fun on that. It also depends a little bit about your location. There's some places in the world that the winds are very consistent in terms of they don't vary much in their strength. So you might actually only need one board. But for me, for what I'm dealing with in the UK, the conditions are changing all the time. So for me, I need that minimum of 2 boards to know that I can sail and perform and have fun in all the conditions that we have here. Lastly, if you're kind of more a beginner into the wave scene, well, first of all, I would recommend you getting a free wave board rather than a more sort of dedicated wave boards like I've got here. So yeah, once you're improving maybe your jumps, your wave ridings a little bit more, then you might start to think about leveling up on your sort of wave board and getting something that's a little bit more high performance. If you're on intermediate, I think you can add a couple more litres onto what I said previously. So for example, for me, now that I have a 69 litre, if I was a more intermediate wave rider, I'd maybe have a 75 as my sort of smaller wave board and maybe like an 85 as my bigger wave board. Hopefully that helps a little bit deciding on what board sort of volume is going to be best for you. So sails, building up your quiver with sails. So obviously if you want to make the most out of all the conditions, then you're going to want, you know, quite a few sails, especially in the UK, where, you know, our winds range massively from, you know, maybe those 17, 18 knot marginal days to mega stormy 40 knot days. If you're starting off, you have a limited budget and you just want to stick to a few sort of key sizes, I would probably go for the kind of 3.7, 4.2, 4.7 and maybe 5.3. And then obviously that can vary depending on where you are in the world. If there's places where it's consistently less windy and you want maybe just a couple of sails, maybe a 4.7 and a 5.3 will be good. And then places that are super windy, maybe like in the Canaries, for example, you might decide to drop a size and just get the 3 key sizes, I would say, of 3.7, 4.2 and 4.7. Having said that, I think when you get to a higher level and you really want to pick and choose the best, best sizes that are going to suit not only your board size but the conditions you sail in, I think it's good to put a little bit more thought into it. So, for example, with me, I kind of had the 3.7, 4.2, 4.7 set up, and then after a bit of a think, I went to a 4.0 and a 4.5 instead. Basically, it suited me more to have a smaller sail, like a 4.0, that I could ride on my smaller board. The 4.2 was kind of feeling a little bit heavier, so it made sense for me to, drop down to a 4.0 from a 4.2. I also used to have the 4.7. I've now moved down to a 4.5, partly down to 2 reasons. Firstly, I was getting kind of overpowered on the 4.7 quite quickly as soon as the wind started to pick up. And now with the 4.5, I can hold on to it for much longer. Also, it was rigging with a 400 mast, and now the 4.5 rigs with a 370. So that's another thing to bear in mind. Dropping down a mast size is going to obviously make the whole setup a lot lighter. So even though the 4.7 might have had a bit more power, again, adding weight to the whole board and everything, I feel like with the 4.5 I've got now, everything's a bit lighter. I can probably get going in the same wind as I used to with the 4.7. Yeah, it's worth thinking a little bit about what size differences you want your sail quiver to be, looking at your weight and looking at what boards you have. Lastly with that, I would recommend, if you want to get like a full big quiver, is the smaller sizes, the differences are going to make a bigger impact than the big sails. For example, the difference between a 3.4 and a 3.7 and a 4.0 might seem quite small, but in the stronger winds they make a really big difference. So it's worth getting your smaller sizes sort of closer and in your bigger sizes bigger. For example, the difference between a 3.7 and a 4.0, obviously 0.3, but then a 4.0 to a 4.5, 0.5 is not going to feel as bad. So now we're going to move on to basically talking about my equipment for this year, my setup, for you guys to know. So starting with my small board, I've got my 69 Grip 4 this year. My bigger board is a 79 Grip 3 thruster setup, new board for this year. And then my sails, basically I have 4 sails that I use pretty much 90% of the time. And that goes from 3.4, 3.7, 4.0 and 4.5. And then I have a 3.0 just in case for those nuclear conditions. I also actually have a 5.0 that I think I've used once in a whole year. So they don't get much use. I find the 4.5, I can pretty much sail in everything. I can float around in the break while other guys are on 5.0 and 5.3s because of my lightweight, especially paired with, a big floaty board. And yeah, the 3.4 is pretty much as small as I get. I only really use a 3.0 when it's really, really cranking. So in terms of the sails this year, I've got all my sizes at the moment as the standard superheroes that I've kind of been using throughout the years, the different sort of evolutions of them. I would say the sails are fairly similar to last year. A couple of sizes they've modified. The 3.4, I think it's a little bit shorter, a little bit more boxy. So yeah, these sails are proven amazing wave sails. Over the years, they've made sort of small adjustments every year because they are so good. It's really hard to improve them, and I do sort of wonder how they do it every year. So with the sails, I pair them up with the platinum masts for my 340 masts, and I have gold masts for my 370s. So this year, I've had my booms for a couple of years now. These are the platinum skinny booms, which are incredible. If you haven't moved to a skinny boom, whatever brand it is, just get a skinny boom. You're never going to look back. It was probably the single biggest thing that improved my performance, I felt like, when I transitioned to it. Everything felt lighter, everything felt more manoeuvrable, easier to do instantly. Some people, maybe who've windsurfed quite a long time, might take a little bit of getting used to it. My dad's been windsurfing for a long time. He sort of transitioned to the skinny boom. I think it took him a few sessions, but now he loves them. So if you've got an old big fat boom, just get a skinny one. I'd say that's the best purchase you're going to make. On my booms, I've got it's a big hole there. So on my boom, I'm using 30-inch Duotone harness lines. I say Duotone because I know there's quite a few brands doing harness lines, and they all seem to be different for some reason. So I don't know what that might be in other brands, but they're Duotone 30s. They're kind of the standard length, I'd say, to go for. I wouldn't really go below 28. I think maybe another thing to point out is I actually use quite a loose harness. So actually, if it was a tight harness, I'd probably be looking at getting bigger lines. Bigger lines is just going to help you in every sort of sense in windsurfing. If you're out in really sort of on-off conditions, you want those bigger, looser lines to be able to maneuver your sail better. And when you're playing long, full speed, the bigger lines, you're going to be further out, the sail's going to be more upright, and it's going to work more efficiently. So if you're still on those sort of 24-inch lines, bin them and get some bigger lines. I think that's my full sail setup pretty much. So I guess now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Grip 4. I've actually been using this shape for the last year and a half now, with the previous model, which was the Fanatic Grip. I think what they've done with this shape is massively improve the wave performance of the board. Pretty much hands down the best wave board I've had. It's the closest thing to a surfboard I've ever used as well, and also not just that surfy style, but it works in kind of everything, which I think is quite unique and something that the guys at Duotone now, used to be Fanatic, have always tried to keep in mind, is having a board that works in everything. Not too many bad things I can say about it. For me, the main features that I love, it's rail to rail, super sort of carvy, surfy style. It's more on the front foot. It's a quad board. It's more on the front foot than the thruster board, which sort of means you might have to be a little bit more advanced to get the most out of it, I would say. What I would say about this board is it really performs when you're powered up. And it's not performing quite as well when you're least powered up. That's when you'd probably move to a different model, for example, the Grip 3. But amazing when it's powered up. It's super controllable. And yeah, I like to call it my sort of knife. That's what it feels like when it's on the water. When you're putting those turns through, it just feels knifey, and it's cutting through the chop and cutting through the waves. And you're going to get some of the best turns in your life on this board for sure. Moving on to my bigger board this year, which is the Grip 3. Kind of the evolution of the old sort of Fanatic Mamba. Actually, I feel like they've brought the characteristics of this board closer to the Grip 4. So they have actually quite similar characteristics, but this version of it, a little bit shorter, a little bit more parallel rails, means it's more of a kind of speed orientated board when you have less power or less ideal conditions, I would say. I think that's one of the reasons they decided to call it Grip 3. 3 obviously being the thruster, and yeah, compared to the old Mamba, I'd say this board kind of finishes off the turns much better than the previous Mamba, and feels slightly more carvy, I would say, as well. Not quite as much of that skatey feeling, which just means you can finish off those turns really nicely and have a little bit more control, but you're still going to have a little bit more speed in those sort of less than ideal conditions. So to summarise what I've got this year with the 2 Duotone boards, I've got one that's kind of more control orientated and one that's more speed orientated. I think for me, when I get to the beach and look at the conditions, I'm almost trying to counteract what the conditions are doing. For example, if you've got a lot of powerful conditions, what I mean by that is if there's really strong wind or really big waves, there's a lot of power going through my equipment, through my boards and sails. I want to try and be as controlled as possible. So I'm going to use, in that situation, my Grip 4, the quad setup. If I get to the beach and I feel like I need more speed and power, and we got really small or weak waves that aren't going to push me as much, or we got really light wind, I want something that I'm going to get the most speed out of. And in that situation, I'd get my Grip 3 out the van, and the thruster setup is just going to mean I can drive through those turns, I can get upwind, I can get planing a lot easier. So those are the kind of two situations where I'd use those boards. Now I'm going to quickly touch on what sails I use with which boards. So with my small board, I use 3.0 up to 4.0. With my bigger board, I'm using 3.7 up to 4.5. As you can tell, there's a little bit of a crossover there. And there's a few scenarios where I would, cross over and use a big board with a small sail and vice versa. Yeah, just thought of an example where I used my big board actually with a 3.7. Was in Rossniger, amazing spot in Wales. I was on my small board 69 with a 3.7, and actually during the front side turns, I feel like I was losing a lot of speed. One, because it was so onshore, and two, the waves were just not quite powerful enough to carry that speed through. So I actually came in, got my big board, Grip 3, 79 litres, and had so much more fun out there. Obviously having that little bit bigger volume and the thruster design meant I could sort of just power through those turns, and sort of the board felt like it was flying a little bit better on the bottom turn and carrying more speed, while the Grip 4, being really quite control orientated board, was slowing down a little bit. So I was able to get speed through those turns and get a little bit of a looser feeling that this board gives you. Another example, I went out pretty recently, a day here near Hot Pipes actually, in Hove. And I went out on my small board and a sort of my 4.0, so overlapping those sizes again. But those conditions on that day was actually quite windy, quite cross-shore. So it meant, through the bottom turns, I wasn't actually slowing down that much, and I was able to make the most out of, this super rippable board. So, it really depends on the spot you're at. Is there current? Is it really onshore? All these factors will make you decide basically on having the quad more controllable or the thruster sort of more speed, a little bit more lift. I think we're just going to look a little bit about the setup and how I set up my equipment. Yeah, let's start with the straps, I guess. On my two boards, I have my straps pretty much to the limits of how wide I can get them. For me personally, I like to have them quite wide. I can get my feet wide apart, get more control, maneuverability over the board, and I can get really low. I also have them spaced quite close together when I put them in. That means you can have them quite high and tight, and you can get your foot really far over into the middle of the board and put pressure, through your calves. And you can take them out really easy if you get in a difficult situation. So I'd 100% recommend you set up your straps, quite high and tight rather than sort of quite flat. Just less risk of injury, and hopefully you're going to perform better as well. Secondly, the UJ position. They actually have two positions here marked out this year, which is quite nice. I'm pretty much most of the time using it in what they call here the best position, kind of the center position. And then if I want a little bit more speed, a little bit more sort of tight, loose turns, I'm going to put it a little bit more to the rear, but I actually didn't find I liked it as much right at the end. That's just kind of my personal opinion. And that's the same on both setups. Now, talking about my fins, I'm using K4 fins. I've had K4 fins for a number of years, and I absolutely love them. What I'm using in my Grip 3 thruster setup is a 17 centimeter scorcher in the middle, and on the sides I'm using AIs and in 10 centimeters. For me, this is the setup for speed and that control off the top. You can get those slidey turns, but those fins really hook back on and get you back going on the waves really nicely. So yeah, this is kind of the setup I'm using, you know, for those more difficult conditions. I haven't actually really used this in proper waves yet, so I'm not really too sure what setup you'd use there. But yeah, I'm using the fronts basically all the way to the back, and as with most of my boards, trying to get my back fin over my foot straps. Now with the knife Grip 4, I've had this set up for the past year and absolutely loved it. It's one of my best setups. 2 Scorcher 14 in the back, and in the front I'm actually using 8s. Previous years I've actually used 9s, but I found they're actually too big. They're kind of dragging a little bit, and I was actually scuffing some of my turns, and as soon as I went down to 8s, I just felt like everything was flowing better, had more speed, had more control through the turns. So yeah, it's definitely important, you know, picking the right fin setup, not going too big, not going too small either. But these Ezzies really complement the kind of whole concept of the board. So much control, so much grip off the turns, so that is my setup. As I said before, I've been using Superheroes for quite a few years, so I feel like I've been able to adjust it, you know, the downhaul and the outhaul preferences that suit me really well. But for me, it's quite simple, it's quite easy. The way they've got the VTS system makes everything really easy. And I pretty much use a downhaul. I downhaul it pretty much in between the two. And I tend not to adjust the downhaul really at all. Maybe if it gets, you know, really light wind or really strong, I adjust it, but like pretty much only a touch. That's just because I found in the middle for me works the best. For those people who might downhaul it loads and push it sort of to the max or past the max, I found that in those strong wind conditions, it actually give me less control, weirdly. I think that's just partly, you know, almost having less downhaul will actually keep the nose of the board down and keep it a little bit more controlled. So that's what I found. So that's why I kind of keep it in the middle of that sweet spot that gives me sort of control and also a little bit of drive. Then lastly, with my sort of boom height and that whole settings, I actually keep my boom really low. That's kind of a little bit of a personal preference as well. I find when the boom is really low, I have more control again, and I can also get lower. If the boom is already up here, it's harder to get lower on those bottom turns. So the lower the boom is, for me, I can get lower, and that's gonna basically help me in my turns, I find. And then the outhaul, you kind of want the sail to touch the boom slightly. I wouldn't say you want the sail to be sort of, you know, fully wrapping over the boom. That's not good. But don't have it so it doesn't touch the boom, because that's going to kind of spoil the profile of the sail, and it's going to mess it up the way they've designed it. So try and keep it in that sweet spot again, I would say. I think I've kind of covered most things. If you have any questions, please just put them down in the comments. I'll try and answer them as best as I can. If I feel like I've actually really missed something out, I might make some other videos throughout the year discussing or talking about my equipment. So yeah, hopefully you found this interesting. Hopefully you've learned a bit and it can help you in your purchasing decisions or tuning decisions. And hopefully you can have more fun on the water, perform better. That's what we all want. So yeah, I think that's a wrap. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys have learned a little bit about it, and hopefully catch you guys on the water soon.